Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
And we are super excited to get into this one today.
Yeah, we really are. So, I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are holding on to a piece of incredibly juicy, totally unverified gossip.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Like, maybe it's about a rival at work or, a public figure that you just can't stand and your thumb is just hovering right over the send button on your phone.
Just waiting to drop the bomb.
Exactly. But why does it feel like you will physically, biologically explode if you don't share that information immediately?
It's a real physical tension.
It is. Where does that burning anxiety come from? Because today, we're going to look at a man who lived in 180 BC, a guy who felt that exact same biological pressure.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. And he actually wrote down the definitive cure for it. Now, usually when we talk about wisdom or, self-help or personal development, we're looking at the latest bestseller.
Yeah, like a new book by a neuroscientist or whatever.
Right, or some tech entrepreneur telling us how to optimize our morning routines and hack our dopamine. But our mission for this deep dive is completely different.
We are going way back.
Way back. We're looking exclusively into the first 24 chapters of an apocryphal book called Sirach.
Also known as Ecclesiasticus, depending on, your translation.
Exactly. And our goal isn't just to read ancient history. We are acting as your guides to help you extract highly practical wisdom, moral insight, and daily life application from a text that was written over 2 millennia ago. Okay, let's unpack this, because what is truly surprising here is that a text from around 180 BC feels like it was written directly for the complexities you and I are navigating today.
It really is staggering when you lay it all out.
Yeah.
I mean, when you dig into the source material, the overwhelming realization is that human nature has not fundamentally changed at all.
Not even a little bit.
No. The backdrop changes, right? The technology obviously changes. But the core psychological and social dynamics.
Like how we deal with fair weather friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or how we handle sudden adversity. Or even just the quiet temptations of wealth and status. It's absolutely identical. We are essentially running the exact same human software today.
I love that phrase, the same human software.
Yeah, and what we want to do in this deep dive is navigate these early chapters of Sirach to show exactly how relevant this is to you right now, today.
Yeah.
We aren't going to just summarize the text.
Right, no boring summaries here.
Exactly. We're going to tear it down to its studs and figure out how its mechanisms actually work.
I love that approach. But, before we can actually apply the wisdom, we really need to understand the crucible in which it was forged. We can't just parachute into the text.
No, context is everything.
It really is. We need to transition from our modern, hyper-connected world back to the dusty, culturally fractured streets of ancient Jerusalem to meet our author.
Yes, let's set the stage.
So, the man is Jesus Ben-Sira, or to give him his full ancestral introduction, which I love.
That was quite a mouthful.
It is. Simeon, son of Jeshua, son of Eleazar, son of Sira. In his world, he was known as a hakam.
Which translates to a wise man.
Right. And a sofer, meaning a scribe. He lived around 180 BC, and he ran a Beth HaMidrash.
A house of learning, basically an ancient academy.
Exactly. Now, one detail that immediately jumped out at me from the sources is his business model, actually.
Oh, yeah, this is fascinating.
He taught for free.
Yeah.
He literally says in the text, acquire wisdom for yourselves without money.
Which is, that's just a profound statement when you consider the political and economic climate he was operating in.
Because all the other philosophers were charging, right?
Oh, absolutely. In that world, ancient sophists and Greek philosophers routinely charged massive fees to tutor the wealthy elite. It was a very lucrative gig. But Ben-Sira just opens his doors. He is actively democratizing wisdom.
Wow.
But to really grasp why he's writing this, we have to look at the geopolitical tension of his day.
Right, because it wasn't a peaceful time.
Not at all. Ben-Sira lived during a time of intense Hellenistic or Greek influence. We are talking about the era following the conquests of Alexander the Great.
And Alexander didn't just conquer territories militarily, did he?
No, that's the key. He conquered them culturally. He exported the Greek way of life everywhere he went. So by 180 BC, Jerusalem is sitting right in the crosshairs of the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire in Syria.
Which are both deeply Greek in their culture.
Deeply Greek. And this isn't just a matter of changing the official language or something superficial.
What did it actually look like on the ground?
Hellenism brought gymnasiums, new forms of entertainment, theater, new philosophies, and new ways of viewing the human body. It was this highly cosmopolitan, intellectually aggressive attitude.
So you have this traditional Jewish society in Jerusalem that is being heavily pressured.
Yes, particularly its youth. They are being drawn by the dominant, flashy Greek culture.
Okay, hold on. I need to stop you there and push back a little, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because when you describe it like that, an older teacher watching his culture get overtaken by flashy foreign ideas, it's very easy to picture Ben-Sira as just an angry traditionalist.
Right, the old guy waving his cane.
Exactly. You know, the ancient equivalent of an old man yelling at kids to get off his lawn, telling them to stop reading Greek philosophy and go back to the old ways. Is he just a grumpy reactionary?
It's a completely fair question, but the sources actually indicate he was the exact opposite of a sheltered reactionary.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ben-Sira was a scribe and a diplomat. He wasn't some hermit living in a cave out in the desert. He traveled extensively.
So he actually knew the world he was criticizing.
Intimately. He mentions explicitly in the text that he traveled in the lands of alien nations and tried, quote, both good and evil things among men. He was heavily involved in civic life.
Wait, didn't he even face danger during his travels?
He did. He mentions facing danger to his life from slander during his international trips. He sat at the tables of foreign leaders, he understood Greek rhetoric, and he fully understood the appeal of Hellenism.
So his wisdom is really battle-tested.
Exactly. He isn't rejecting the globalized culture out of ignorance. He is rejecting it out of deep familiarity. He looked at the absolute best the world had to offer and decided that his ancestral traditions held a deeper, more sustainable truth.
That makes him infinitely more interesting. He's like a modern cosmopolitan professor.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You know, the type, someone who has traveled the globe, lived in London, Tokyo, and New York, studied every kind of culture, but who ultimately comes back to his small hometown and says, you know what? The local, grounded traditions, the quiet ethics of our ancestors, that's where the deepest truth actually lies.
Totally. He saw the shiny object of Greek philosophy, and he pushed back, asserting that the local traditions just held more weight.
And the irony is that we only have this text in its most famous form because of a profoundly cosmopolitan act of translation.
Yes, the grandson.
Right. We get this incredible framing for his work from his grandson. Decades later, around 132 BC, long after Ben-Sira has died, his grandson travels to Egypt during the reign of King Euergetes.
And he finds himself in a very different environment.
Completely different. He's in a foreign land, surrounded by a massive Jewish diaspora that primarily speaks Greek. So the grandson decides to translate his grandfather's Hebrew text into Greek so that these expatriates and, anyone else willing to learn can actually read it.
And the prologue the grandson writes is fascinating all on its own.
It really is. He literally asks the reader for indulgence. He notes how incredibly difficult it is to translate Hebrew concepts into Greek without losing their force.
Which is, it's an ancient 2nd century BC acknowledgement of that universal truth. Things get lost in translation.
Right. He's trying to map ancient Hebrew idioms onto Greek philosophical terms, and he is just sweating over it.
He is, and it points to a deeper reality about Ben-Sira's worldview that is crucial for us to understand before we look at his specific advice.
Which is what?
Well, Ben-Sira writes from a very practical, earthly perspective. In historical terms, this worldview is often associated with early Saducean thought.
Okay, can you break that down for us, just the historical context?
Sure. So in ancient Judaism, you had different schools of thought. The Pharisees, for example, were developing ideas about a complex afterlife, the resurrection of the dead, elaborate hierarchies of angels and demons.
Kind of a very cosmic, supernatural focus.
Exactly. The Sadducees, on the other hand, were highly traditional and focused almost entirely on the present world. And Ben-Sira aligns with this deeply grounded, present-tense philosophy.
So no big mystical afterlife themes in his writing.
Right. There isn't a focus on a mystical afterlife or cosmic battles in the heavens. For Ben-Sira, the focus is entirely on living a good, honorable, and ethical life right now on this earth.
Because the consequences of your actions play out here.
Yes, good or bad, they play out in your lifetime, in your reputation, and in the legacy you leave your children.
So it's incredibly high stakes for the here and now. He is answering a question that is deeply relevant to us. How do we maintain our core values in an increasingly globalized, constantly shifting culture?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because in 180 BC, that shifting culture was Hellenism. Today, it's the digital age, globalized media, and the relentless churn of the internet. Ben-Sira's answer is that you have to double down on foundational wisdom. You cannot just drift with the cultural tide.
Which transitions us perfectly from the historical man to the core of his message. Let's look at his ultimate muse, which is wisdom itself.
Yeah, particularly in chapters 1 and 24.
Right, because for Ben-Sira, wisdom isn't just a collection of smart tips or life hacks. It's not just practical advice.
It's much bigger than that.
It is. Wisdom is personified in this text as a cosmic, pre-existent force. The text says, "Wisdom hath been created before all things, and the understanding of prudence from everlasting."
And then in chapter 24, wisdom actually speaks in the assembly.
It's this beautiful poetic sequence. She says she came from the mouth of the Most High, covered the earth like a mist, and then was commanded to pitch her tent in Jacob, meaning Israel.
So she is woven into the very fabric of the universe.
Exactly.
What I find so striking about this is how heavily it contrasts with the Greek way of thinking.
Yes, the contrast is stark.
Because the Greeks were obsessed with knowledge. If you read Plato or Socrates, there is this underlying assumption that virtue is purely a function of knowledge.
If you know the good, you will do the good.
Right. If you are smart enough, if you have the right information, you will naturally be a good person. Ignorance is basically the only cause of evil. But Ben-Sira looks at that and boldly rejects it.
He absolutely throws that out.
He does. In chapter 1, he lays down the foundational equation of the entire book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
What's fascinating here is the sharp distinction he draws between intellect and morality. He claims that true wisdom is completely inseparable from reverence and ethics.
You can't just be intelligent, you must be good.
Exactly. For Ben-Sira, a brilliant person who lacks a moral compass is not wise at all. They are actually a fool, and a dangerous one at that.
Like an educated villain.
Exactly. He argues that you can have all the Greek education in the world, you can be a master of rhetoric and mathematics, but if you do not have a fundamental reverence for the divine order, if you do not have the fear of the Lord, you have zero actual wisdom.
That is such a direct, almost aggressive challenge to how we operate today.
Oh, it completely upends our modern value system.
Think about our 21st century reality. We are absolutely obsessed with being smart. We want to acquire data. We want the best life hacks. We want to optimize our routines to maximize productivity.
We want to hack the system.
Right.
Yeah.
We look at Silicon Valley, we look at tech innovators, and we value raw intelligence and processing power above almost anything else. We assume that if we just gather enough data, we can solve the human condition.
But Sirach challenges us to realize that data without reverence and intelligence without morality is just noise.
It is a radical shift in how we measure success. And he doesn't just say this to be pious either. He links it directly to human flourishing.
Right. He writes, "The fear of the Lord maketh a merry heart, and giveth joy and gladness and a long life."
He is telling us that the foundation of a genuinely fulfilled life isn't found in how much you know, but in your posture toward the universe.
Are you arrogant with your knowledge, believing you are the master of your own fate? Or do you have reverence? Do you acknowledge your limits?
I want to make this highly practical for you listening. Think about your own life and the decisions you make daily. Are you prioritizing being clever over being wise?
We all do it.
We really do. We look for the loophole, the shortcut, the most efficient way to win an argument or close a deal. So here is a practice for you. Before making a major decision this week, whether it's a strategic move at work, a financial choice, or how to handle a conflict in a relationship, just pause.
Take a breath.
Yeah. Don't just ask the modern, culturally conditioned question, what is the smartest move? Instead, ask the Ben-Sira question, what is the most honorable move?
I love that.
That simple shift from cleverness to honor is the exact transition from Greek philosophy to the wisdom of Sirach.
It is a profound shift. Because choosing the honorable move isn't always the easy move. In fact, choosing honor over cleverness often invites immediate difficulty.
It usually costs you something.
Always.
Yeah.
The clever move might make you a quick profit or win you a temporary advantage. The honorable move might cost you money, cost you a relationship, or damage your short-term reputation.
Which brings us to a massive, unavoidable theme in the text.
Yes. If wisdom requires honorable living, what happens when living honorably brings suffering?
Oh, this is where the text gets incredibly gritty. We're moving away from the high-minded poetic concept of cosmic wisdom right into the dirt and grit of human suffering.
Chapter 2 is it's heavy.
It really is. It opens with one of the most striking warnings I've ever read in ancient literature. He writes, "My son, if thou come to serve the Lord, prepare thy soul for temptation."
He doesn't sugarcoat it at all.
Not one bit. He doesn't say, if you serve the Lord, everything will be fantastic. He says, get ready for a fight. He goes on to say, set thy heart aright and constantly endure, and make not haste in time of trouble, for gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity.
This is deeply psychological. Sirach is combating two very common, very destructive human tendencies regarding hardship.
What's the first one?
The first is our tendency to collapse at the first sign of difficulty. We often carry this unstated assumption that if we are doing the right thing, if we are living ethically, our lives should be smooth.
Right, like an ancient form of karma we invent for ourselves.
Exactly. So when trouble hits, when we lose a job despite working hard, when we get sick, when a relationship fails, we completely panic. We think something has gone terribly wrong with the universe or that we are being arbitrarily punished.
But Ben-Sira says,
He says, no, the trouble is the point. The trouble is the furnace. You aren't being punished. You are being forged.
wow. And what's the second tendency he's fighting?
The second tendency is explored in Chapter 5, and it's basically the inverse of the first. It's our tendency to become arrogant when we do something wrong and get away with it.
Oh, yeah. We all know that feeling.
He warns against presumption, saying, say not, I have sinned, and what harm hath happened unto me. Human beings are frankly terrible at dealing with delayed consequences.
If we act unethically and lightning doesn't immediately strike us, we assume the universe just doesn't care.
Right. Sirach warns us against treating patience, the fact that the consequences haven't caught up with us yet, as permission to be reckless. The furnace of adversity will eventually find you, whether through the natural consequences of your actions or just the inevitable tragedies of life.
I really want to pull on that first thread about the furnace, because Chapter 2 feels like an ancient, targeted antidote to modern toxic positivity.
Oh, it really does.
Today, there is this relentless narrative on social media and in self-help circles that if you just have the right mindset, if you manifest correctly, everything will be easy and beautiful. And if you feel pain, you're doing it wrong.
Which is just a recipe for anxiety.
Totally. But think about athletic conditioning. If you go to the gym to build muscle, you do not expect it to be painless. If you pick up a weight and it feels incredibly light, you aren't building muscle. You are wasting your time.
The resistance is the point of the exercise.
Yes. The micro tears in the muscle fiber are what cause growth. Sirach is applying that exact biological principle to our character. The adversity isn't a glitch in the system. It's the required resistance training for your soul. It's the furnace refining the gold.
And notice the emotional regulation he prescribes while you are in that furnace. He writes, whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, and be patient when thou art changed to a low estate.
Cheerfully. That sounds a little delusional.
Well, he isn't suggesting the delusional cheerfulness where you pretend a tragedy is actually wonderful. He's talking about maintaining your composure. You don't abandon your core values just because your circumstances have declined.
Okay, that makes more sense.
The key phrase he uses is make not haste. When the pressure is on, when the heat of the furnace is at its absolute maximum, human instinct is to thrash, to panic, to rush to a cheap solution that compromises our integrity just to make the pain stop.
And Ben-Sira says to freeze.
Freeze. Endure. Do not make a hasty, unethical decision just to escape the discomfort.
I am going to challenge myself to do this, and you listening should absolutely try it with me. When you face a sudden setback this week, maybe a major project at work fails, you get passed over for a promotion, you receive a stressful email, or a relationship hits a massive bump, do you immediately view it as an unfair failure?
Most of us do.
Right. But can you reframe it as the furnace of adversity that is actively refining your character? The practice here is very concrete. The next time you face a moment of sudden, overwhelming stress, I want you to literally say out loud to yourself, make not haste in time of trouble.
Actually say it out loud.
Yes, say it to break the psychological cycle of panic. Don't rush to send the angry email. Don't rush to quit. Let the furnace do its work.
It requires immense internal resilience to actually do that. But as Sirach knows, character isn't just forged internally in isolation. It is deeply tested in our outward relationships.
That is a great pivot.
He moves very fluidly from how we handle our internal struggles with the cosmos to how we handle our social dynamics in the city square. And his insights on the economics of relationships are remarkably astute.
They are ruthlessly pragmatic. We are talking about chapter 6, 12, 19, and 20 here. He tackles friendship, how to handle enemies, and the incredible destructive power of human speech.
Let's start with friendship.
Okay, in chapter 6, he writes, "Sweet language will multiply friends, and a fair-speaking tongue will increase kind greetings." Basically, if you are polite and charismatic, you will have a massive network.
Sure, you'll be popular.
But then he immediately drops the hammer. Be in peace with many. Nevertheless, have but one counselor of 1,000. He acknowledges that a faithful friend is a strong defense, the medicine of life. But he's telling you that true friends, the ones who will actually stand with you in the furnace, are a statistical anomaly.
1 in 1,000.
1 in 1,000.
You have to view this through the lens of his lived experience. Remember, he lived in a politically volatile environment. Empires were clashing, allegiances were shifting all the time.
Right, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He observed people who were friends only when it was politically or economically convenient. He writes with a sharp, almost cynical eye about social capital. Some friend is a companion at the table and will not continue in the day of thy affliction.
Ouch. Fair weather friends.
He knows intimately that people will flatter you when your business is booming, and they will abandon you the second you lose power, wealth, or status.
That is so true even today.
It is. And this is why he is so adamant about testing friends and being fiercely protective of your inner circle. He is advocating for a wide network of peaceable acquaintances, but a microscopic circle of actual trust.
And he extends that intense caution to enemies in chapter 12.
Yep.
He says, never trust thine enemy. For like, as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness.
What an image.
Right. He even warns that if your enemy humbles himself, bows down, and comes crouching to you, you must take good heed and beware of him. He is saying, do not be incredibly naive. People carry deep-seated resentments.
They really do.
Just because an adversary is smiling at you today or offering a truce because they are currently in a weaker position doesn't mean the rust of their animosity has been wiped away.
It's a metallurgy metaphor. You can polish a rusty piece of iron so it looks shiny on the surface, but the structural integrity is compromised. The rust is still eating away at the core.
Such a pragmatic view.
And that kind of pragmatism culminates in his advice on speech, particularly the mechanics of gossip. In chapter 19, he gives what might be the most psychologically accurate advice ever written on the topic.
Oh, this is the one that gets me.
He writes, "Hast thou heard something? Let it die with thee. Be of good courage, it will not burst thee." He is addressing that visceral physical sensation we feel when we hold a secret.
I genuinely feel attacked by this verse. Because it is so biologically accurate, think about the modern equivalent, which goes back to the scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The texting scenario.
Right. You get a scandalous text message, or you see a wild social media post from a coworker that they accidentally made public. The immediate, almost biological urge is to screenshot it, open a group chat, and forward it.
You have to share it.
You feel this tightness in your chest, this anxiety. Like, if you don't share this exclusive piece of information, you will literally burst open. The fact that a man sitting in Jerusalem in 180 BC felt that exact same physical anxiety about holding on to a secret shows how deeply unchanging human nature is. Sirach is looking at us across 2 millennia and saying, just let it die.
Let's look at the psychology of why it feels that way. Why do we want to share gossip so desperately?
Because it's fun?
Well, because it gives us momentary social power. It is a quick hit of dopamine. When you hold exclusive information, you become the center of attention in your tribe. It increases your temporary social currency.
That's only temporary.
Exactly. Sirach says that long-term trust is infinitely more valuable than short-term social currency. He writes, "He that repeateth a matter separateth very friends." If you gain a reputation as someone who cannot contain a secret, your circle of true friends, that elusive 1 in 1,000 will shrink to 0. You trade enduring trust for a 5-minute dopamine hit.
So here's a practice I'm going to try, and you should try it too. It's the 24-hour gossip fast.
I like the sound of this.
Sometime this week, you are going to hear a piece of juicy, unverified information about a colleague, a friend, or even a public figure. The moment you feel that urge to share it, I want you to intentionally let it die with you, just for 24 hours.
Just sit with it.
Sit with it. Notice the physical sensation in your body of wanting to share it. Acknowledge the tension and then put your phone down. Do not send the text. See if you literally burst.
Spoiler alert, you won't.
You won't. The urge will pass, and you will have actively built internal discipline and proven yourself to be a more trustworthy person.
It's a fantastic exercise in self-control. But as we dive deeper into Sirach's pragmatism, we have to pause and confront a significant hurdle.
Yeah, we can't ignore the tough stuff.
Up to this point, his advice has felt remarkably timeless. But his worldview was forged in antiquity, and sometimes it crosses into territory that makes modern readers deeply uncomfortable. This is a crucial part of our analysis.
We can't just skip the hard chapter.
Exactly. We cannot just cherry-pick the inspiring quotes. We have to engage with the text's ancient blind spots. We must read with historical discernment.
This is a really important pivot for us to make, because it's true, up to now, Ben-Sira sounds like this brilliant, timeless mentor you'd want to grab a coffee with.
He sounds great.
But then you read chapters 7, 9, and 12, and you run headfirst into a brick wall of ancient cultural norms. Let's look at two specific areas that are highly problematic for modern readers: his views on charity and his views on women.
Let's start with charity.
Okay. In chapter 12, he writes, "Give to the godly man and help not a sinner. Do well unto him that is lowly, but give not to the ungodly. Hold back thy bread, and give it not unto him, lest he overmaster thee thereby." He is explicitly telling his students to place strict moral conditions on their charity.
This raises an important question. How do we engage with an ancient text that contains ideas we find ethically regressive without throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
It's a tough balance.
It is. To do this, we must impartially report these views as artifacts of their time. We are not endorsing his conditions on charity. We are exploring why he believed them. We have to understand the economic reality of 180 BC.
Right. It wasn't exactly a thriving middle class.
No. Sirach lived in a survival-based tribal economy. Resources were incredibly scarce. There was no governmental social safety net, no welfare state, no widespread philanthropic organizations.
You were on your own.
Completely. His view of charity was entirely about communal preservation. If you gave your severely limited resources, your actual physical bread, to someone who is actively destructive to the social order, a sinner in his terminology, you weren't just being nice.
You were putting your family at risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
You might be actively endangering your own family's survival by empowering a threat.
Wait, hold on. Even understanding the history, that still feels incredibly harsh. As someone raised in a modern culture heavily influenced by the idea of unconditional charity, the idea that you feed the hungry regardless of their moral status, reading the phrase, "hold back thy bread," feels viscerally wrong.
It does. It jars our modern sensibilities.
It feels like a localized triage mentality, whereas modern ethics lean toward universal aid. We believe a starving person deserves food, full stop.
And that modern ethical stance is a luxury of surplus economies and centuries of moral philosophy that came long after Ben-Sira. He was operating in a world where a bad investment of a loaf of bread could have dire, immediate consequences for the giver.
Okay, I can see the context, even if I don't agree with the application.
Right. And the tension between ancient survival and modern ethics is even more pronounced when we look at his patriarchal views.
Oh, boy. Yeah, this section is rough.
In chapters 7 and 9, he expresses views on women that are starkly at odds with modern egalitarian values. For instance, regarding daughters, he writes, "Hast thou daughters? Have a care of their body, and show not thyself cheerful toward them."
Don't even smile at your daughters.
It's severe. And he warns extensively about the beauty of women as a snare, writing, "Many have been deceived by the beauty of a woman, for herewith love is kindled as a fire."
It is genuinely hard to read that and not feel an immediate, strong pushback. He seems to view women almost entirely through the lens of societal liabilities or, as dangerous temptations for men.
Yes, very objectifying.
He treats daughters as property that needs to be guarded to avoid bringing shame to the father. But again, let's unpack this impartially without endorsing it. This profound anxiety reflects an ancient, heavily patriarchal social structure.
A completely different world.
In his world, marriages were not about romantic love. There were critical economic and political alliances between families. A daughter's reputation was tied directly to the economic and social survival of her entire extended family.
The stakes were astronomical.
It was an incredibly unfair, oppressive burden placed on women, but it was the undeniable structural reality of the ancient Mediterranean world.
It was a world where men held all the structural and legal power. Therefore, the text is written entirely from a male perspective, addressing male anxieties about maintaining that power, property, and social standing.
And so they blame the women.
Exactly. The burden of moral failure is often unfairly shifted onto the woman in these ancient texts. What is valuable for us today is not to adopt his cultural blind spots or his patriarchal anxieties, but to look underneath them and understand the underlying human mechanism he is trying to operate.
Which is what exactly?
He was deeply concerned with setting boundaries to protect what he valued, his resources, his family, his community. He just drew those boundaries in ways based on gender and moral exclusion that we find completely unacceptable today.
So the reflection for you, the listener, is this. How do we extract the wisdom of setting healthy boundaries without adopting the ancient prejudices?
That's the real application here.
Right. Take the issue of generosity. We don't have to agree with Sirach's strict moral exclusion of the ungodly, but we can absolutely learn the necessity of giving thoughtfully and sustainably. Are you giving your time, your emotional energy, or your money to people or situations that are actively toxic or manipulative to the point where it drains you completely and harms your own family?
That happens all the time.
We can embrace the beautiful modern ethic of unconditional compassion while still exercising the ancient wisdom of setting boundaries so that we aren't overmastered by those who take advantage of us.
That is the exact kind of discernment this text demands. It shows how we can filter out the ancient cultural norms to find the enduring psychological truth.
Yeah.
Fanning for gold.
Exactly. And once we do that filtering, we arrive at what I believe is Sirach's ultimate thesis. We move from how to protect ourselves with boundaries to the ultimate question of human value. If we're setting all these boundaries, what is it that we are actually trying to build? What is the true currency of a successful life?
This brings us to the profound insights scattered through chapters 3, 4, 10, and 11. And spoiler alert, the true currency of life, according to this cosmopolitan, highly educated diplomat, is not money, and it is certainly not power.
It's the opposite of power.
It is humility. In chapter 3, he drops this incredible countercultural line. The greater thou art, the more humble thyself, and thou shalt find favor before the Lord.
I love that.
And in chapter 10, he asks a rhetorical question that just stops you in your tracks. Pride is the beginning of sin. Why is earth and ashes proud?
Earth and ashes.
Such a visceral, leveling image. Earth and ashes. We are temporary, fragile dust. We're going to blow away in the cosmic wind. So what right do any of us have to walk around with inflated egos? If we connect this to the bigger picture of the human condition, Sirach is deeply concerned with our addiction to the illusion of control. We build wealth, we acquire titles, we seek political power, all to convince ourselves that we are in charge of our destiny.
But we aren't.
No, because wealth and power are brutally fleeting. He reminds his readers in chapter 10, a king today, tomorrow he shall die. And when a man dies, regardless of how much power he wielded, he inherits creeping things, beasts, and worms.
Okay, that is dark, but very true.
It is a dark, stark reminder of our absolute mortality. Because of this undeniable biological reality, judging people by their outward appearances or their current social status is an act of supreme foolishness.
That is exactly why chapter 11 is one of my absolute favorites. He writes, "The bee is little among such as fly, but her fruit is the chief of sweet things."
Such a great metaphor.
He tells us, do not boast of your clothing, do not exalt yourself in the day of honor, because God's works are hidden. The divine order routinely brings up the mighty and casts down kings. It's a complete subversion of human status hierarchies.
And he applies this directly to how we wield power over others, which is so relevant.
Yeah, in chapter 4, he gives a warning to anyone in a position of authority. Be not as a lion in my house, nor frantic among thy servants.
That phrase, a lion in thy house, is a masterpiece of psychological observation. It describes someone who demands absolute submission, who rules their private domain by fear, anger, and intimidation rather than respect.
Like a dictator in their own living room.
Exactly. Sirach is specifically warning against the abuse of authority in private spaces where there is no public accountability. He's demanding an integrity that survives behind closed doors. You might be a respected diplomat in the city gates, but if you are a tyrant to your servants, your wife, or your children, you are fundamentally corrupt.
So it doesn't matter what people think of you in public.
Not at all. True legacy, according to Sirach, is built on how you treat the poor, the fatherless, and your subordinates when no one important is watching.
I immediately think of the modern toxic boss. We all know this archetype. The CEO who is incredibly charming on interviews, who gives massive sums to philanthropy and gets written up in magazines.
But who is an absolute nightmare to work for.
Exactly. An absolute tyrant behind closed doors, screaming at their assistants and creating a culture of sheer terror. Or the parent who is beloved by the community but rules their living room with an iron fist. Sirach is saying across the centuries, it doesn't matter how much social standing you have in the city square. If you are a lion in your house, you lack wisdom.
Your true character is revealed precisely by how you treat those who have absolutely no power to fight back.
It all cycles perfectly back to his opening premise in chapter 1. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If you truly revere the divine order of the universe, you will recognize that you, too, are merely earth and ashes.
And out of that profound humility, you will treat your fellow human beings with the dignity that reverence demands. You won't be blinded by the illusion of your own superiority because you know that tomorrow you could be the one cast down.
So, how do we make this actionable before we wrap up? I want to invite you to do a bee audit of your life this week.
A bee audit. I like that.
Think about Sirach's metaphor of the humble bee. Who is the bee in your workplace, your community, or in your family? I'm talking about someone who is easily overlooked, who doesn't have the flashy title, who might seem little among such as fly, but who consistently produces the sweetest, most essential fruit.
The unsung heroes.
Right. It could be the administrative assistant who quietly keeps the whole office from collapsing, or the relative who always cleans up the kitchen after the chaotic family dinner while everyone else is talking. Find that person this week and actively verbally acknowledge them. Let your humility recognize their true value.
And conversely, you must check yourself to ensure you aren't playing the lion. It's an ongoing daily practice of realigning our perspective with reality. Sirach forces us to look past the superficial, flashy markers of success, the ancient Greek gymnasium or the modern corner office, and focus entirely on the bedrock of character.
This has been an incredibly rich, challenging journey through a text that, honestly, most people never even open.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. We've covered geopolitical history and toxic positivity, the biology of gossip, ancient patriarchy, and the true nature of humility. But I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
In chapter 1, Sirach tells us that all wisdom cometh from the Lord, and is with him forever. If wisdom is eternal, but our lives are incredibly fleeting, Sirach poetically calls the days of a man a drop of water unto the sea, then the pursuit of wisdom isn't about becoming perfect before we die.
That's impossible for a single drop of water.
Instead, the pursuit of wisdom is about aligning our tiny, brief drop of water with the current of the eternal ocean. You don't have to be the whole ocean, you just have to flow in the right direction. How will you let the current of wisdom shift your direction today?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.